everybody. It's Coffee with Angie this week, and I'm joined by a very, very special guest who I'd like to introduce to you all. We have with us a professional speaker and the CEO of Compete Every Day, which is a brand that he started back in 2011 by selling t-shirts out of the trunk of his car behind CrossFit gyms.
Yep.
So if you all know me, you know that this is probably how I got to know the brand, right? So we've got Jake Thompson with us today. And just a little background on Jake. He's a third generation entrepreneur. He has his MBA from the University of Dallas. And he's also the youngest strategic advisory board member to sit on U of D's College of Business. So this is just an amazing, amazing opportunity for all of us to learn and really do a deep dive into growth mindset. And I'm going to hand it over to Jake here for a second to say, hey.
Hey, put me on the spot like that. I wasn't ready for it. Excited to be here hanging out with everyone. As Angie shared, we've had a chance to work together, had a chance to come out and do a workshop with the Apex team. I get a chance to work with business owners all over the country, honestly, with everything from workshops and team programs to individualized one-on-one coaching. So I'm looking forward to talking growth mindset because it has been pivotal in my career. It's also been pivotal in a lot of people's career from a business and just personal life standpoint of flipping that perspective on our current situations and also helping position us for better long-term success. So today will be fun.
Yes, yes. So let's jump in. I'm going to start with the obvious, Jake. What does it mean to compete every day?
Yeah. So, normally when we talk competition, everybody's always concerned with what someone else is doing. What's that business down the street? What's my rival? What's so-and-so I see on this wonderful device on social media doing? And so our constant idea is that I always have to compete against everyone else. And in reality, that can be a draining experience. It'll burn you out mentally. It'll wear you down. There's no finish line to it because there's always someone ahead of you and there's always someone behind you. So what we talk about when we talk about competing every day, it's this idea of competing against your own self. It's the idea of showing up every day and asking, how can I do better today? Where can I beat my own previous best? Because we don't control other people. We don't control outside situations. We always control, though, how we respond. And so if you think about it like a track star, if an athlete lines up at the starting line, the gun fires, takes off sprinting. If as she's running, she starts wondering where all the other racers are or who yelled something from the stands, she's going to look to her left and to her right. She's going to look behind her. And when she does that, we know how bodies work. You naturally slow down. You sometimes run out of your lane or you fall down. Our bodies aren't designed to run at peak speed forward if we're constantly looking everywhere else, if our shoulders are turned, if our focus is off our finish line. And that same mindset applies to life. And so our whole company mission, my whole focus is helping people build the mindset to focus on the things they can control and then push themselves to raise that standard each and every day to ultimately compete against their own best, to try to get a little bit closer to discovering what their true potential actually is.
That's awesome. Anybody have any feedback before I really start deep diving here with Jake? You guys can put your videos on and unmute yourselves if anybody wants a quick moment. All right, then we're going to go right into it. So, of course, as a group of physical therapists, entrepreneurs, and, a lot of us in leadership roles, on a daily basis, I think you guys can all agree with me that we deal with a lot of obstacles, right? So, I don't know about you guys, but, I'm juggling HR things and staffing things and financial things and, growth for the business and, all of the things that go with this picture. And that's before I even think about treating a patient and how to manage their care. So I think one of the areas I would like to kind of dive deep into is how we can really utilize and train our growth mindset in being able to tackle those obstacles, those daily things that come our way every day, because they're going to happen inevitably.
Yeah. Well, and that's the beauty of business ownership, leadership, and just life leadership, is that you're always going to have a full plate. You're always going to have a million things going on that you need to influence or make a decision on, or challenges you have to deal with, or fires that you have to put out, in addition to everything else that goes on in life. And so our challenge as leaders is to really hone in on what we control, how we can best influence and make an impact there, and then effectively, how do we apply that growth mindset? So Angie, fill me in a little bit. Have y'all been diving into growth mindset the last few weeks, or is this our initial conversation on it?
This is our initial conversation.
Okay, so for anyone that isn't familiar, let's talk growth and fixed mindset. A lot of this came out of Carol Dweck's work. Her book, Mindset, I recommend almost to anyone. I think it's a top 5 read for anyone in terms of building self-awareness, which we know is key at being a leader. How do we build that self-awareness and eliminate more blind spots? But in the book, she talks about how we perceive situations. And so a fixed mindset looks at challenges as a bad thing. They see feedback and criticism only as negatives. A fixed mindset will avoid challenging situations, adverse situations, anything that's difficult. For one, fear of failure, because they identify if they fail or fall short at something, that they then see themselves as failure. They don't like any kind of feedback or criticism because they feel it's an attack on them versus their work. And so ultimately what you find is this individual that believes, I'm only born this smart, I only know this much, this is all I'm ever going to do. I'm not naturally good at this, then therefore I can never build the skill for it. So they're very much believing that the way you're born is the way you always live. Dweck's work, though, dove into this really more. And what she discovered is individuals with a growth mindset, which is essentially the opposite. It's the idea that it's not necessarily about what I was born with, but what are skills that I can build? What are things that I can do? How can I put in work to develop this? They look at challenging situations, not necessarily as things to avoid, but things through which they'll grow and get better. They'll look at feedback and constructive criticism as great things because in it helps them eliminate those blind spots, build the self-awareness, and improve. So we can see kind of the two differences in the thoughts. A fixed mindset, this is how I am, this is how I'll always be, I can't change. If you're not naturally smart, you'll never have a chance. Growth mindset says it's not necessarily about what I was born with, but it's about what I intentionally choose to build and how I choose to perceive and look at situations. And so now that we've kind of understood those two, it really comes down from a leadership position of how we're looking at things on a daily basis. You know, when we look at challenging situations within our organization, for instance, maybe we're short-staffed. Maybe we're running around like a chicken with our head cut off. And for a lot of people, they get in this constant state of woe is me, woe is me, woe is me. Everything's working against me. The universe hates me. Can't do this. You just kind of start down that negative spiral versus stepping back, looking at this challenge of being short-staffed and say, okay, this is actually an opportunity for me to improve my efficiency and make sure what I'm doing is actually the most effective. Because for a lot of us as business owners, when our plates are full, we get into the routine of doing the same things, doing the same things, doing the same things. And we rarely ever take that step back and say, do I actually need to be doing this? Is there a way that I can part-time hire someone? Is there an online service that I can contract out to take this 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hours off my plate every week? Is this actually an opportunity for me to improve how I operate, how I run my business versus just being caught in that hamster wheel of continually looking at the challenge, thinking about yourself and feeling sorry for yourself in that situation? The other is being involved in groups like this is great for building your growth mindset because it allows you to have open discussions, to have collaborations, to learn things that maybe are in your blind spots and to continue building those skills. So by being here, being active, you're proactively choosing that growth mindset muscle by saying, I want to learn. I want to add new skills. How can I add on to what I'm already doing? How can I improve what I'm already doing? that's a vote in the direction of being someone that's more growth minded. And so that kind of works in your favor there. So those are kind of a few initial, let's say, outline of how we look at a growth versus fixed mindset, and then where it can kind of come into play during our work. And a lot of it comes down to what are we choosing, or excuse me, how are we choosing to look at our situations? And that's really the core belief of growth mindset versus fixed, is how do you choose to look at different situations and different experiences? And another good example that I have that I usually give teams when I train them is, you talk about some industries, we'll say gyms, for instance. A lot of kind of global level mainstream corporate gyms will cycle through a lot of trainers. They'll cycle through a lot of early employees. And talking to managers and some experienced employees, that's really frustrating, because they're like, man, I come in, I spend a few weeks or a month training someone, and then they leave. And man, why am I wasting all that time? And so they get into the kind of that fixed mindset of, this sucks. This is a challenging situation. I don't like it. I want to avoid it. Maybe we shouldn't hire people, maybe whatever. We try to flip that perspective a little bit and say, okay, what if you don't train the person and they stay? So that's kind of the ultimate caveat. What if you don't train the person and they stay? Well, that ultimately hurts you worse. So we want to take that off the table. We're not going to not train someone. So now, if we've committed to training someone, how do we actually look at that situation differently versus going in and saying, well, I'm probably going to lose this person in 3 or 4 weeks. This is not going to work out. That's taking that negative attitude, that negative mindset, that this is a bad situation, into it, versus how we challenge them to look at it and say, they may leave 3 weeks, a month, 3 years. We don't know. We don't have control on that. But what we do have control on is, how well are we training them? How are we continually improving how we communicate and train with them? So if you look at every situation to train that individual as an opportunity to improve how you tell your story, how you train that individual and train all incoming individuals, and how do you communicate with them? So every instance is not a disappointing if they leave. It's actually, man, I just spent 3 weeks improving my training skills. I'm getting better at this. Or, hey, I saw this issue we keep having in our training program. I identify this instead of, oh my God, this sucks, this is always terrible. Oh, I found an opportunity on how we can improve how we train people and probably keep them around longer versus that quick turn. And so all that is a subtle shift in how we look at it of, crap, we always lose people. This sucks. I don't want to do this. I have such high turnover, versus how can I look at this as a learning experience where I can get better training and also evaluate how our training process is going to say, where can we improve it? Because at that point, you're taking your pride off the table. You're not worried about, how you look and feel. You're only worried about, how do I get better at this situation? Does that kind of clarify and provide a few clear examples, Angie?
Yeah, for sure. To sum it up in what you just said there, is basically what we look for is what we're going to find, right?
Your focus determines your fate. Yeah, absolutely. What we choose to look for, we all know those people that have a problem for every solution. But we also know those type of individuals who are going to look for that solution. They're looking for that opportunity. For me on a personal side, I can talk about, when COVID hit, every one of us on this call was affected and impacted by it. As a speaker who travels the country speaking to large groups and teams, that role of our business was completely shut off for months. And so initially you have that first day, you start seeing the dominoes fall and everything going of like, oh man, this sucks. I feel bad. Like, how am I feeling bad for myself? How do I change this? But then, because you've been building that growth mindset muscle, because I've been training myself little by little by little to look for opportunities, I suddenly saw, well, I'm home from March 13th to August 8th. I've not been home, not on a plane, traveling anywhere for this stretch of time in well over a decade. What can I now build? What can I create? What can I do in my business that I didn't, quote, have the time to do prior? So how am I going to look at this situation and this time as home as a good thing to actually be able to build and grow versus feel sorry for me, feel bad as me, I lost this whole side. What am I going to do now that's in my control to take advantage of it? And so, yeah, it comes down to where we focus and what perspective we choose to have.
That's awesome. I think the majority of the people on this call, I'm not sure how many of you guys are in the hands-on program that are on the call or viewing or watching. But what you just said there, Jake, about what we can do differently as opposed to continuing to do the same thing over and over again. What can we do differently to build our business, right? And that's where I know for myself, that's what we looked at. And diagnostics is one of those extra buckets that we looked at saying, okay, how can we drive this part of the business forwards? What can we do from a training aspect, from an education aspect? You know, what else can we bring in? So I think that a lot of you guys that are on this call that have, you know, ventured out into being pioneers in the diagnostic industry, you know, obviously that takes growth mindset for sure. But I also know, Jake, that there's a lot of people, a lot of owners and practitioners out there that maybe haven't, whether it's diagnostics or whether it's something else in their business, that maybe haven't committed to taking that next step. And there's so many more of them that we could outreach to. What suggestions can you give us as kind of ambassadors of this message to go out to give our other colleagues?
Yeah, one of the things I think that's important to look at is just the importance of making the investment in almost a science experiment. I mean, that's ultimately, if we're honest with ourselves, that's what business is. It's one giant science experiment of, this is how I'm going to market my business. This is how I'm going to try. Ooh, that doesn't work. Maybe we should try this. Ooh, that works a little bit, but let's try this. That works really well. And it's, if you're in that mindset from marketing your business, you try in-person events one day, you're passing, you don't really get much traction. You try Facebook ads, you get a little bit. You start attending networking events. Oh, that really works. Or I'm popping into gyms. That works really well. All of those pieces are essentially building that growth mindset muscle, because you're saying, I'm trying this, it doesn't work. Well, I'm not taking it personally. If passing out flyers at this race didn't really work for my business, I'm just going to try something else. It's that same approach of like, I'm going to keep figuring things out until I figure out what works. And a lot of us struggle with that in life. A lot of us struggle with those pieces in other areas. And so the first thing I would say is, one, just kind of get creative and look at it as a giant science experiment of how you're building, and looking at things that way of, if it doesn't work out, move to the next one. Like, it's not a personal attack. It's not you're a failure. It's this specific route did not work. And when you're trying something new, when you're forging into kind of those new spaces, that has to be your mentality, because either no one's done it before, you've never seen anyone do it before, or you just are kind of blazing a new path. And so that's a part of it. The other piece is, don't be afraid to get creative and look in other industries. Like other ideas of how other businesses operate, other solopreneurs, other small businesses, other large businesses. What are the things that they do that you haven't seen done in your industry, in your space? And I say that because everyone really gets siloed in on, this is how we do it, this is how everyone does it. And there's truth to that. There's a lot of benefits to having mentors, to talking to other business owners that are in your industry to understand what they do well. But there's also a lot of value of looking at other spaces and putting a different spin on how you operate, and trying things that other spaces do. And that ultimately goes back to that perspective of looking at things as a giant science experiment, instead of, if this doesn't work, I'm a failure. If that doesn't work, we're a failure. It's, no, how do we just test and try and continue to adapt?
That's great. Do you have an example that you've used, that you've taken from another industry, that you've implemented into Compete Every Day, or through the Jake Thompson speaking?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like the whole model is kind of that conglomerate smorgasbord of other ones. I mean, you mentioned it. I started literally just as an apparel company. I was selling t-shirts, trunk of my car, I was traveling to CrossFit events. I was working those. But as we grew, I noticed a couple of things. One, this wasn't how I always wanted to do business. I didn't always want to be going to events and races. I didn't want to always send teams there. Two, I could see shifts coming in the industry that we needed to differentiate ourselves a little bit more. And three, I just looked at what was our brand advantage. And for us as a company, it really wasn't the t-shirts and stuff. It was the message behind it. And so I started looking at other spaces. We looked at groups that do online courses. I looked at speakers. I looked at media companies. I looked at how brands were starting to incorporate podcasts and other content on there. And so I just kind of opened my eyes to say, what are other people doing? What do they do really well? I got into masterminds and networking groups with people that were in tons of different industries, individualized coaching, group coaching, courses, online content, online marketing, in-person real estate, like just started learning what they all did. Because one, it gave me a different perspective on how businesses could operate, what potential was out there. It allowed me to elicit feedback on what we were doing and kind of ideas I thought of how we could get outside that box. And that eventually kind of put us down this path that we're at now, that essentially I call it just a lifestyle brand. And that phrase is a common word thrown out by every t-shirt company that wants to be a lifestyle brand. But ultimately, I mean, our business is driven through my speaking, my book, our podcast, our apparel. Like we have multiple buckets and pieces designed around that message that honestly, I just pulled from different spaces, because it wasn't about how do I sell the best t-shirt and how do I get the most t-shirts out? It was how do I take this brand message and what I believe, the practice I'm doing, the business I believe in, and how do I get that out there? And so what do other companies that have a great message, that do things well, what do they do? And let's look at pieces of that.
Yes. Yes. You brought up two key things there. Differentiating, right? Being that differentiator in the market, doing things, you know, that not everybody else is doing. I think that is a huge, huge piece of the puzzle. You know, that's something that, you know, we've tried to do through Apex, and in bringing different services and not trying to look like your typical physical therapy, you know, clinic and do things as the typical physical therapy practice.
Well, and I would jump in. One thing that y'all do really well, knowing kind of I've had interactions with you online, is how you tell that story. And that, as business owners, that never changes or stops. Like you're always looking at how you tell your story and how to refine it and improve it. And I laugh that we're going into year 10, and I have friends that have just kind of learned of the brand and people that have gotten to follow it, and they're like, oh, your branding and stuff's so good. I'm like, it wasn't in year 1, 2, 3, 4. Like you just keep tweaking it. And so the one thing is, as businesses, the book Story Brand by Donald Miller is phenomenal around the concept of how you tell your company's story. They have a ton of extra free content. They do workshops and in-person stuff around just telling your story. But the one thing that I think y'all do really well, Angie, that I think great companies do really well, is they understand that the story isn't about them. And as a business owner, I can say this from personal experience, it's really hard because you want to be the hero of the story. You want to show up, you want to help that client, you want to help that patient, that customer. You want to be the one that saves the day, that helps them get back to where they were. And they look at you and are like, oh, you're my hero. Like we part of us are all have that selfish idea, but as Miller argues in his book and makes an incredible point, we actually need the customer, the client, the patient to be the hero. If you look at a movie like Star Wars, like our job as businesses is to be Yoda. It's not to be Luke Skywalker. Our job is to just kind of say, here's what you can do. Here's how we can help you get there. And our whole role is to help you get there, not to get you there, to be your hero, to save you. It's just to help you become that hero. And so when we're going into differentiating our story and we're talking about that as business owners, I really recommend Story Brand for people, because it turns our perspective around from trying to tell everybody, this is about me, this is what I do differently, this is me, because that's what most businesses do. They just want to tell you all about themselves and what they do differently and how amazing they are. And the businesses that seem to stand out are the ones that say, tell me about you. How can we help you? What are you trying to do? Let me hear more about you. When they turn that lens off of themselves and onto the customer and position it that way, it really changes that dynamic of how the business can differentiate itself. Because you think about it, if you go on a date or an interview with someone, if it's a first date and all the other person does is talk about themselves, then you're bored out of your mind. Like you don't want to be there. But great dates really work out well if the other person is asking you about them, about you. If you're sitting across the table and the person keeps asking you questions about you, you're talking, you enjoy talking about yourself. You really enjoy that they're asking questions about you. Business is the same way. Customers are wanting businesses to take interest in them, to ask questions about them, not to just shout out, this is what makes me different.
Hey, Jake, I got a question
Yeah.
for you. So do you know who Chris Smith is with the Campfire Effect?
I do actually know Chris personally. Yeah.
So I figured you did. You're a guy who speaks across the country. So is he. He has a company called the Campfire Effect. Just a quick plug for him as well. I'm not associated with him in any way, but to build on what you're talking about, he's a big believer in story brand as well. And I had an opportunity to spend a couple of days with an intensive on that piece of it, and it was revolutionary for me in terms of the messaging. And it was all about these concepts that you're very well in speaking into. You know, I love that whole Star Wars analogy. No matter how hard I try, I want to be Yoda, but I end up being Jar Jar Binks. No matter how hard I try. So anyway, yeah, I love what you're saying.
Thank you. Chris does phenomenal work with Campfire Effect. If for those of you watching, if you're on Facebook or Instagram Live, Clay Hebert, Hebert, fellow speaker, he does a phenomenal job around this content as well, and he puts a ton of it on social media. Clay is really good about how do you really work what you phrase. And Clay's kind of deal was the perfect intro was one of his kind of key tenets of how do you actually introduce what you do in a very concise manner that tells people how you help people, who you help and how you help them versus sometimes when we ramble on that. But he puts out a ton of free content around this. And so I always recommend him. So Chris Smith with Campfire Effect, Donald Miller with the story brand and building a story brand. And then finally, Clay Hebert as well, all have phenomenal content around this. If that's an area you feel like you struggle in, or you're just like, I can't help but keep talking about ourselves, but everybody else in my space, every one of my other competitors are talking about themselves too. So how do we differentiate ourselves? We start talking about the customer and helping the customer versus us.
I love that. I think that many of us are probably familiar too. There's, from the practitioner side, there's research out there that shows from surveying patients in them rating their practitioner and how they rate, you know, how much their practitioner, I think it's like in the 90-something percentile that their satisfaction is on how the practitioner engaged. Did they listen? Were they engaging? Were they smiling? Were they happy? Like, versus did they actually like fix their sore thumb? You know, that was second important to, you know, she was kind and she was empathetic and she was a great listener. These things rank higher in our patients' eyes as well as from a satisfaction standpoint. So that's really cool to segue all of that together. So you touched, Jake, on quite a few different you know, books and mentors that you've had and things that you've used to really advance your career. I want to go into with building the growth mindset about surrounding yourself and controlling your circle.
Yeah,
and going into that.
That's pivotal. Jim Rohn, classic motivational speaker author, is famous for saying that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And a lot of us from a personal, even professional standpoint, aren't as intentional with the people we associate with as we should be. Obviously, investing time on a call like this is incredibly crucial with that. But what about our friendships? What about the people we hang out with at work or after work that are kind of our peers? How are we intentionally selecting them? Because if we're the average of that, and we're really the one that's on these calls, that's doing the work, that's trying to grow the business, and the other ones that we hang out with are a lot of fun to hang out with, but they really don't care about that stuff, well, naturally, they're going to pull us down. The law of averages are right there going to pull us down. What we want to do is challenge ourselves to kind of set our pride aside and start putting ourselves in rooms, in groups, in situations where we're not the smartest. We're not the most successful. We don't have it all together. And there's going to be a couple pieces to that you're going to have to deal with. The first is being okay, being in a room where you don't know it all and you're not the most successful. And understanding that that's 100% okay, because if the law of averages is right, those people are going to pull you up. You're going to learn more. You're going to be able to do more. I laughed at one of my best friends in Oklahoma. He laughed that they moved into a very nice neighborhood a few years ago. And it was a little bit more than they were wanting to spend on a house. They loved the house. They loved the neighborhood. But because of it was that specific neighborhood and who else lived in that area, the amount of networking and connections and relationships he's built has dramatically changed his career, their whole situation, light years, because of those relationships. So putting themselves in different situations. So that's the first one. The second one that inevitably you're going to encounter is this fun idea of imposter syndrome. Going into a room where there's people that are smarter, more successful than you, you're going to have this idea that they're going to find out that you're not quite as good as they thought you were, or that you have in your head, and they're going to ask you to leave. And honestly, imposter syndrome is a very common theme for anyone that's a high achiever, business owners especially. Like if we have that attitude of going and growing and getting better, because all it is us stepping into an uncomfortable situation where we're not used to. Especially if we're used to being in the room and knowing that we have it all together and everybody looking to us. When we go into another place and we know that other people have achieved more, they're more successful, maybe they have a better operations than we do, we start to hear those voices. And so imposter syndrome is just one of those things where you're going to deal with, you acknowledge it's there, but you remind yourself you've done the work to build your practice. And you're continually doing the work to get to that level. And the only way you get to that next level is by learning and associating and networking with those type of individuals. So for all of us from a professional standpoint and a personal standpoint, you have to ask, are these relationships enriching me? Are these people that I'm going to and asking about business advice, managing work-life balance? How do I handle patients? Do the people I go ask advice to, have they actually done the things that I need answers to or not? Like, it's like going to someone that you know has a really terrible marriage and asking them for relationship advice. Like, that's not really the person you want to go to for that advice. And the same with business. Like, if someone has no idea anything about running a business, has anything around those lines, and you're going to them with business questions of how do I operate, how do I run, how do I manage my employees, it's a really tough conversation for you to get the right answers to. That's why I never understood business coaches that have never actually owned and operated a business, even if it was just a solopreneur shop, because as we all know, like when you're wearing every hat, like you understand a little bit more prioritizing and managing focus and not having enough hours in the day, and managing people as you hire for someone and always hang on to that first or second hire way too long that you should have let go. Like, you have those conversations. So being intentional with the type of people you hang out with, being intentional with who you go to for questions, for mentorship, for advice is going to be pivotal to succeeding, because otherwise you're either spinning your wheels by yourself, you're hanging out with people that aren't helping you get to that level you want to get to, or you're asking people questions that honestly they have no business answering for you.
I can personally say, to piggyback off of that, Jake, I can personally say that, well, first off, I'd like to applaud everybody that's on this call and that's listening and doing exactly what Jake has articulated so well, in that we are surrounding ourselves today with, the best and the brightest in our industry and trying to grow and move forwards from that. I will be the first one to admit that I've had the imposter syndrome. I've been there. Joe, my husband, he's been there. The people, these names that I see on the screen here from this Zoom, Dr. Kostopoulos, Dimmy. I mean, this man is like one of the most intelligent people I know. So, for me to, think of, putting myself in the same room or in the same peer group as somebody like him, it makes, definitely in the beginning, that was a little uncomfortable. How do I live up to, what do I even say to this guy? I don't know. And then, Joe has gone through the diagnostics program and is now board certified as ECS. And I still can't say the word, Will, electrodiagnostician, right? Did I get it right? Yeah. Okay. So as as an electrodiagnostician, man, in the beginning when he was going through that program, he would come home from New York and say to me, like, Ange, I don't know. I think everybody else is so much smarter than me. Everybody else just got out of school not that long ago. Like, I went to school forever ago. Like, I don't know if I can do this, you know? And so we had some good heart to hearts and some good talks. And quite honestly, the messaging that Jake here is bringing today, he's been a huge mentor of mine, and something that I've brought into, you know, Joe and I's relationship, in using a lot of the messaging that Compete Every Day throws out there, and controlling our controllables, and in utilizing our growth mindset to work through some of these things. So that was just a little personal blurb to piggyback off of what Jake was saying there. But
I was going to say, and you hit the nail on the head of, like, when Joe talking about, like, I don't know, all these other people know this stuff. Like, all of us want to be super confident, especially when we're in this position of power and helping others. Like, we want that confidence. Crazy part about confidence is the only way you get it is through reps and experience. It's by doing that work. And so that feeling of, like, oh my gosh, I don't have it, I don't know it, I'm not in the right spot. Like, the only way we get over that is just by reminding ourselves to show up and do the work. And Amy Cuddy has a phenomenal TED Talk on the power of presence and body language. If you've ever heard her talk, Cuddy is her last name. She has a book called Presence, and she subscribes some to the, like, fake it till you make it, get the Superman pose, like, try some of that stuff when you're in those awkward positions. But you have to, as a leader, put yourself into those positions where you're not the smartest one in the room, where you can build those relationships to learn and get better, because it's about putting your pride aside for the sake of progress. And that's ultimately what we want, because many a business owner has gone down in flames because of their pride, but rarely has the one that is chosen just getting better, just focusing on their progress instead of worrying about how they look, how polished they are, if they're the most successful or not. Those people tend to succeed in the long run.
Yes.
If you don't mind, I would like to say something too. I mean, really awesome stuff shared by you, Jake, and you, Angie. And I definitely agree so much about the idea of where you put your attention in. This is what you're going to end up achieving at the end of the day. But here is a thing that I have observed time and time again with quite a few people, especially businessmen and business people in the physical therapy area, is that people will listen to information, they will learn things, but learning is not necessarily applying. So they may just get the information passively, or even participate exchanging on conversation, but then when it comes to application, sometimes people do not apply what they have learned or what they have decided to apply. So one of the major success points, I believe, about Angie and Joe and their practice is the fact that they are not only sponges of information where they get all this new data, new information, new technologies that they learn, but they actually apply them. They put the knowledge into application, which is great. And one last thing, because I cannot not plug two things in this event here, is talking about learning and talking about application and focus. So right now, one of the major issues that we are facing within the physical therapy profession, and I know that several people here are physical therapists, is that on January 1st, Medicare is cutting the physical therapy reimbursement by 9%. So, and if you think that 9% is insignificant, think again, okay? I'll explain to you in not just a webinar, in my workshop next week, October 7, why this will affect your practices a lot more. But there is a choice to do something about it or do nothing about it. So I have put together an actual workshop on October 7, and James will share right now for everyone the link where you can register for it. I have put together a workshop where not only you are going to have an actual calculator where you're going to be able to plug in numbers from your practice and see various scenarios on how the change, the Medicare cut, will affect the bottom line of your practice, but also I will give you 7 different ways that you can neutralize or mitigate or even bypass completely this Medicare cut. So that's the first thing that I want you to look at. It's not about just learning something, but applying something. It's a workshop that I'm going to do. And also a big reminder that this Saturday and Sunday, we are doing the international conference in electromyography and MSK ultrasound. James will also share that link for you if you have not registered. It is a free event for you to attend. You get CEUs, 16 CEUs in a lot of states around the country, and you will have the opportunity to hear from some amazing people from around the world in the areas of EMG and ultrasound, including Dr. Jun Kimura, all the way from Japan, teaching you new technologies in electromyography. So love to see you guys there. And Jake, my God, how amazing what you shared today. And Angie, thank you for doing this. This is really awesome.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, Angie, I want to ask you something based on what he just said. You guys have put into practice stuff. Have things always worked out? Everything you put into practice? You batting 1,000?
Not even close.
Okay. So the reason for that is to echo what he just mentioned about learning it, networking, knowing all of this information, because the information's everywhere. The magic is in the doing. Most of us, especially business leadership, like a lot of times we get this, I'm blanking on what the exact phrase is that describes it, but essentially we don't act because we're so worried about making the wrong move. We're so paralysis by analysis. We're overanalyzing. We're scared to make the wrong move. We're afraid if we make this move and it fails, what's going to happen to us? That totally dives back into the growth mindset of, I'm going to make this move. If it doesn't work, I'm going to try something else. I'm not a failure. We're not a failure. We don't suck. This just didn't work out. What can we do now? And that piece, to tie in kind of what you said and what he just shared, is crucial for us. If we've got to get out of this thinking, if I pick this path, if I go down this route and it doesn't work out, everything's over with. No, it's you go down this path, you figure out if it works. If it does, keep running. If it doesn't, let's go over here and try this.
100%. There is a saying that Joe and I use, fail to succeed. And that's what we live by.
That is what we're all just trying to do.
Right. Would anybody else like to open anything up to Jake? This is like an amazing opportunity to pick this guy's brain, to ask him any questions, anything to help us build better growth mindset, better team building. Anybody else, please?
Jake, I'll ask you a question.
Yeah, let's go.
I mean, the times we're going through right now with the COVID pandemic are unprecedented times, very different handlings sometimes required than before the pandemic. Just give a little bit in terms of your viewpoint. What changes do you see happening in not in the general business, generally in businesses, but kind of more specifically in the private practice space, and what would be some of your ideas on things that therapists and other private practice owners should be focusing on in continuing their growth and expansion?
I mean, I think the one thing that's going to be the most important just right now, actually two, we'll say. The first is, Angie alluded to it earlier, controlling the controllables, understanding as a leader, this current time, you can't control it, you can't change it, you can't wish it away, but you still control your actions, attitude, and effort every day. So getting out of this sense of, well, I can't do it the way I used to do it, so maybe we can't do this or we shouldn't do that, versus can't do it the way I used to do it. What can I still do? What do I still have control of? And ultimately, every practice is going to be a little bit different in that. But from a leadership standpoint, that has to be paramount, is understanding what's still in your control and using it to the full advantage every day. Not knowing as much specifically about the individual practices, the one thing I might be most intrigued about is the importance of building out your brand messaging from a personal and business standpoint. Because for the time being, a lot of people aren't going back into gyms and physical workout facilities and places where they might get injured, they might get hurt, they might need physical therapy, they might be on the rehab because they're spending a lot more time at home. They're spending more time in quarantine. And when they do that, they're going to be on this little fun device here, and they're going to be searching for content and things. And so, you know what? The best time to start building your personal brand was 10 years ago. The second best time is today. And so the idea is, what are you doing to create content, to position yourself, to talk about how you help people? Not how awesome you are, not how amazing your practice is, but how can you help people? What are things that you can do? What are things that they can do at home? Building that brand that way is ultimately where I think is going to separate a lot of people, because people are consuming stuff like crazy online. Some people are getting off social. They're more spending on YouTube. They're getting off Facebook. They're going on Instagram. Like, there's so many changes, but the one thing that won't change is having that personal brand that says, here's how I solve problems. Here's some information to help you solve your problems now. How can I personally connect with you and build that? And that, I mean, that goes back to business back in the day, of why people in small town America would go shop at the local department store, because they knew the family that owned it, even when Walmart came into town. And they probably kept those businesses around quite a while longer than Walmart coming in and snatching everything, because people would go and pay a little bit more for that relationship and person they knew. And today's age, especially, people connect with you, whether they ever physically know you or not, they feel like they do. And so that, building that brand, putting that content out there, sharing that information, and talking about how you help them becomes incredibly valuable. The other thing is just continuing to invest time in things like this and building relationships, because we all know relationships are so key to business. So how can we continue to learn from each other, support each other, and then find out, hey, what's this person doing? Oh, that's awesome. Maybe we should implement that as well. Or, oh, that didn't work for me, but maybe it works for you. Here's what we did. Here's what I do differently next time. Those kind of things are going to be key, because we don't know what the next 6 months, 12 months are going to look like, but we do know personal branding will never go away. It'll actually only increase in value for all of us to stand out in the market. And the second is learning to control those controllables, because a lot of people right now are just using the line, I'm just going to just kind of hang on and be passive until 2021. And then that's going to be my year. And they're finding themselves next year, they're going to get lapped by the people who are saying, I still got 3 months left in this year. I'm getting after it. I'm seeing what we can do. I'm making progress every single day on the things that are in my control.
Yes. Perfect. I love that, Jake. You just hit on, I feel like, where we should kind of wrap this up. And that is, it's October 1. It is the fourth quarter. Like, this is it, guys. We've got 3 more months. But again, like, if we go back to what Jake started with, it's what we look for, we'll find. So are we going into it with the fixed mindset of 2020 is over, or we've got 3 months? It's the fourth quarter. Think about all the moves that can happen in the fourth quarter, right? So, Jake, fire us up. Fourth quarter, baby. Give us your fourth quarter speech here.
Man, I thought I just did. You got 3 months left. Why waste time on the clock? It doesn't matter in sports. Even if you're down by 2 touchdowns, you play till the final whistle, because you're just trying to get better. Every rep is a chance to get better. Every opportunity is a chance to get better. And so for those of us that maybe you've just already written off 2020, you're tired of everything that's going on between COVID good in politics and life. I would challenge you to say, get your focus back on what you control, which is your attitude, effort, and actions today, and ask yourself what you're going to do today to move the ball, and repeat the task tomorrow every single day. The other thing I would challenge everyone to do before the end of this year is to create some space. I know getting on calls like this today, doing activities like this is really hard for a lot of us because we have a million things we need to be doing. We have so many things we need to be doing. I can't take an hour out of the day to spend time here. However, spending an hour of time investing in things like this actually helps you get ahead faster in the long run. And so what I would challenge people to do is take an afternoon, take some time. Maybe it's a Saturday, maybe it's a weekday, but take a couple of hours and really evaluate the business. Look at what you're doing. Look at everything that you're doing on a weekly basis. Evaluate if it's actually being effective in the business. Not are you efficient with it, but is it actually effective in moving the business forward? And take that space to really refine everything you're doing, your daily task, what you can offsort to others, what really needs to be cut from your plate, and get a good game plan going into next year so you don't just stay on this hamster wheel of continually staying busy and in motion, but you're focused on how you're getting better.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you so much. This has been just an amazing opportunity. It's always just a blessing to work with Jake and to work with all of you guys that are on this call. I had the pleasure of having Jake actually come to Apex and do a team building, building growth mindset with my staff. He spent 2 hours with us just going through drills, and it was an amazing opportunity. So I strongly encourage any of you that want to look at investing more time and energy into your team to also kind of think about this time to do that. If you need help from Jake, I obviously strongly would recommend doing so. But I mean, it's such a pleasure. Thank you so much for the time to be on this call. Anybody that wants to reach out to Jake, just where can they get you at? What's the best?
Yeah, easiest way, you can email me directly. I'll drop it right here in the chat box. Jake@competeeveryday.com. Competeeveryday.com is usually the best source for anything. But if you have any questions on anything we talked about today, anything that kind of came up, feel free to shoot me an email. Happy to continue the conversation or talk about ways we can help and support your team too.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys.
Real quick, I'm super excited. And thanks again, Jake, man. That was really cool. Motivational and inspiring for sure. So next week, I'm super excited about what we're going to be talking about. I've had a lot of coaching sessions this last week, in particular about if people are overpaying their current providers, they don't know how to incentivize them. And so I've created, using best practices, research, and my own history, how to retain your rock stars without breaking the bank. So we're going to be talking about best practices around how to define payments, but not just that, set expectations, create win-wins. And so that when you do it once, you're maintaining and not recreating year over year over year.
Woo, woo, woo. All right. Fourth quarter, guys. Let's go kill it. Thanks, Jake.
You bet. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, guys.